August 26, 1346, a drenched field near the French town of Crécy-en-Ponthieu. By nightfall, 1,542 French knights, some barely 15, others hardened by 30 campaigns, lay gutted in the mud, their bodies pierced by English arrows in places armor was never meant to protect. The chronicles called it divine retribution, but what they buried was the scandal. Dozens of noble French knights rode into battle drunk on Burgundy wine, their tactics sabotaged by a courtly feud involving a mistress, a bastard prince, and a stolen war map. Some never even drew their swords. Others died tangled in each other's lances, screaming for mercy as the English longbowmen, barely clothed, teeth stained with mead and blood, unleashed another storm from the ridge. Before we continue, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read everyone. The storm didn't fall from the sky, it fell from the ridge at Crécy. 10,000 English archers stood in shallow pits dug by hand that morning, their yew longbows slick with sweat, their arrows fire-hardened and fletched with goose feather. Each man loosed between 10 and 12 arrows a minute. That's 100,000 shafts of death in under 60 seconds. They didn't aim, they harvested. The first wave of French cavalry charged blinded by rage and pride, their command fractured by an argument in Count d'Alençon's tent hours before. The cause? His mistress, Élodie de Brienne, aged 22, had been seen slipping into the Prince of Majorca's quarters the night before. She'd smuggled more than silk under her gown. She carried a sketch of the English encampment, stolen from the king's war desk, and it was a forgery. A deliberate piece of misinformation planted by Welsh spies with honeyed knives and dark adepts. The resulting charge went not into flanks, but into the heart of Edward's artillery, a trap sprung with brutal precision. Steel met mud, blood met lies. The trap ignited not with fire, but with thunder. 7 bombards hidden behind English ranks erupted with a sound that split horses' spines. Bodies flew backward like broken dolls as French knights flipped from saddles, their gilded helmets rolling like coins cursed with the weight of royal arrogance. Among them, Jacques de Vienne, age 38, heir to the Duke of Burgundy, screamed not from wounds but from betrayal. His squire had vanished in the night, taking with him 2 silver flasks and a sealed letter addressed to Her Grace of Navarre. That letter contained the real English position, a truth sold for sex, snatched kisses behind chapel walls, and debts owed in brothels across Calais. The nobles who survived the blast staggered into a forest of stakes, camouflaged under wild shrubs, impaled before they even saw the archers. Edward didn't just prepare for battle, he choreographed a massacre, baited with gossip, armed with peasant rage, and driven by one promise whispered by his captain: "We will slaughter their pride first, then their sons." But not all the rot lay in the French tents. Atop the English ridge, between arrow volleys and blood-slick orders, a different betrayal brewed. Sir Thomas Holland, commander of the left flank and lover to Queen Philippa's cousin Lady Isabel de Courcy, had promised discretion. Instead, he flaunted the affair, parading her azure ribbon tied to his sword hilt, the same sword that had slit the throat of a fleeing French page, barely 13. But what no one saw, save the Queen's steward hiding behind the royal pavilion, was the sealed vellum tucked inside that ribbon. It contained movements of the Genoese crossbowmen, information stolen from a Venetian courier 3 nights earlier, during a rigged game of chance in a Rouen tavern. That intelligence should have gone to the Black Prince. Instead, Holland fed it to a mercenary captain from Gascony, who used the data to bait the crossbow line forward at the wrong moment directly into the path of English arrows. The slaughter that followed wasn't strategy. It was stagecraft. Holland's reward? A midnight assignation with Lady Isabel in a chapel desecrated for the night, the candles lit with oil from a monastery sacked only 3 leagues away. As her lips brushed his neck, far below on the slope, 1,700 Genoese men lay rotting in heaps, their bolts unloosed, their corpses stripped by scavengers before the battle had even ended. By twilight, the French command fractured entirely. King Philip VI, surrounded by half his royal guard and bleeding from a splintered lance strike to the thigh, watched in horror as his banners collapsed, one after another, into the mud. But his fear was not for the war, it was for the secret sewn into the hem of his battle cloak by a handmaid turned lover, Colette de Sancerre, aged 19. Weeks earlier, She had hidden the names of 3 conspirators plotting against him, men seated around his battlefield table. One, the Duke of Lorraine, already lay dead, face down in horse dung with an English bodkin bolt protruding from his left eye. The other 2, still breathing, but gone from the king's side during the critical retreat. They hadn't fled, they'd repositioned to watch the king fall. Philip knew it, and he knew the final air-crippling blow wouldn't come from an arrow but from a dagger in the night, delivered not by a soldier, but a courtier with clean hands and blood on his tongue. That was the true war at Crécy, not between England and France, but between kings too blind to see betrayal riding beside them, and women too underestimated to be seen as anything more than decoration. And in the mud, somewhere beneath shattered armor and false loyalties, a broken crown was almost trampled underfoot almost. The next morning, as the mist clung to corpses and crows gorged without shame, a single figure crossed the blood-fed field barefoot, wrapped in a nun's habit soaked through with rain and sweat. Sister Madeleine of Rouen, former mistress to both Sir Geoffroy de Harcourt and a now-dead English captain, walked straight through the carnage toward the wreckage of a French war tent. In her hands, she held 2 objects, a leather flask laced with henbane and a folded missive marked with the seal of the Black Prince. Witnesses, peasants pressed into burying the dead, swore she wept, not for the bodies, but for the lie she had paid to protect. The letter contained the names of every French noble who had taken bribes for battlefield misinformation. 24 names. 11 were already dead. The rest vanished in the weeks that followed. 1 drowned in a monastery well, another disemboweled in a chestnut orchard, a third last seen boarding a vessel bound for Acre. What chronicles refused to record was what she whispered before handing the letter to a royal archivist hiding among the dead. Victory was bought not with arrows, but affairs and betrayal. Ink and thighs won this field, not valor. And then she disappeared without another word, her veil drifting behind her like a flag of surrender no army ever saluted. The battle ended, the dead buried, but somewhere in the shadow of Crécy's ridge, the echoes remain, the twang of strings, the hiss of scandal, the silence of loyalty sold for one last lie whispered in the dark. By the time the Artois light cavalry arrived, staggering through the mist like ghosts sown from mud and broken dreams, there was no battle left, only butchery. They nearly turned back upon seeing the ridge crisscrossed with black-feathered shafts and bloated cadavers, but their commander, Aymeri de Chatillon, aged 26, was already damned. Behind his polished breastplate, hidden in a locket that never left his neck, was the portrait of a woman. Marguerite de Valois, 16, sister to the Queen and lover to both King Philip and Aymeri himself. She'd warned him of the coming ambush, begged him to stay behind. He marched anyway, chased not by duty but guilt, the same guilt that had driven him to forge letters implicating the Duke of Bourbon in defection. Those letters, routed through a monk who disappeared off the cliffs at Étretat, ended up in Edward's court 3 days before Crécy. Their fallout. The Duke withheld 400 knights from the critical second charge, citing personal caution. What no one knew was that his sword had been dulled deliberately by a saboteur in his own armory. By whose order? Aymeri's. But now he rode alone across a killing field that answered no prayers, only sins. He dismounted not for strategy, but to kneel before his former friend's corpse, sliced open at the spine. And as he did, 2 English arrows struck him, one through the throat, another through the locket. When his body was burned with the others, the portrait melted into ash, along with all proof of Marguerite's divided heart, but not her power. No one suspected she'd soon marry a man who would inherit a throne soaked with the blood she helped spill in secret. The legacy of Crécy wasn't written in treaties or carved into marble. It festered in letters burned before witnesses, in lovers beheaded before confessions. The nobles who returned to France did so cloaked in silence, their tongues heavy with shame and secrets. One of them, Count Raoul de Moulin, returned to his estate to find his wife gone eloped with an English merchant she'd met during her captivity. She'd taken the household jewels and his steward with her. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Black Prince polished his armor beneath banners stitched by women who had shared his tent and his battle plans. One, Clarice of Hereford, was later found drowned in the Thames. Suicide, they claimed, but the midwife who tended her said she'd been 4 months pregnant and the child no peasant's. Crécy ended on a single day, but its consequences outlived kings. Thrones cracked not from invasion, but from scandal. And in every castle corridor where ambition flirted with betrayal, they whispered the same cursed phrase, "Ask not who bled at Crécy, ask who survived with their secrets intact." But some secrets decay slower than bodies, and others rot in courtrooms long after blades fall silent. In the months following Crécy, 9 widows petitioned the Parlement of Paris, claiming their husbands had been murdered by allies, not enemies. One case, the Count of Vendôme, traced his death to a poisoned salve applied by his manservant, purchased at the behest of a rival knight whose debt to a Venetian brothel overlapped with a quiet pact made in smoke-filled chambers at Avignon. That pact, the silence of a papal notary in exchange for one night in the arms of a disgraced duchess, Catherine de Foix, whose diaries, confiscated before her execution, detailed more than lust. They held troop positions, coded cipher keys, and the names of 4 bishops who had funded the English campaign under aliases. Her final entry, written in blood rather than ink, read, "Loyalty is a blade hers cuts deepest when hidden between the thighs." None were punished, none confessed, but those same bishops vanished from public view and never reconvened. History declared it divine justice, but the truth slipped between bedcovers and confessionals, drowned with those too bold to speak. And still, beneath the stones of Crécy's broken chapels, one can almost hear the war drums echo to a rhythm set not by sovereigns, but by seduction, betrayal, and the quiet vengeance of those history tried to forget. Months turned to years, but the ghosts of Crécy did not fade. In 1349, as plague began to blacken Europe's edges, a monk in Picardy was found hanged above his own scriptorium, a torn page nailed to his chest. It bore a list of names: defectors, adulterers, liars in armor, names no one dared speak aloud. Beside him stood a battered trunk, inside which lay a blood-rusted dagger carved with the crest of the House of Artois, and a child's bone doll wearing a bridal veil. The message was clear. The sins of Crécy's battlefield were not confined to the past. They bred heirs. One of those heirs, it was rumored, grew to become a captain in the mercenary free companies, known only as Le Veuf. His tactics mirrored those at Crécy: traps built from gossip, victories bought with seduction, and every conquest followed by a woman gone silent or a priest gone missing. No chronicle named him, but in brothel corners and war tent whispers, his legend thrived. He was not a knight, he wore no crest, but his blade remembered, and so did the dead. The field at Crécy lies quiet now, but the grass does not grow clean. It feeds on secrets, still. And so the scandal of Crécy passed not as lesson, but disease incurable, mutating, generational. In the cathedral at Reims, a stained glass window depicting the so-called glory of the Black Prince was quietly removed in 1352. The reason was not vandalism, but fear. The artisan who crafted it, Laurent de Moray, had vanished days prior, leaving only a shattered kiln, a blood-stained apron, and a scroll hidden behind the altar. That scroll? A confession penned in trembling Latin, detailing a commission financed by Joan of Kent herself, meant to distort the truth of Crécy for posterity with the omission of a certain name: Jean de Calais, age 18, a squire executed before the battle for possession of a sealed message. He was no spy, only a lover coerced into bed by a nobleman hiding treason in poetry. His death erased a scandal that, if exposed, could have unseated 2 thrones. Instead, it festered under silver-tongued eulogies and war songs, because the true victors of Crécy were never crowned. They were kissed in shadows, buried beneath forgeries, whispered about only when candles burned low. History remembers banners, not bedsheets, but the linen of war is always soaked first with lust, then with blood, always. In the end, Crécy was not just a grave for men, but for myths. It buried the fantasy of chivalry under a flood of arrow shafts and whispered names. No knight's code could deflect betrayal sung sweetly into an ear at midnight. No armor repelled a kiss laced with treason. The French didn't lose to English arrows, they lost to their own indulgence, their rivalries cloaked as honor, and their secrets sharper than any blade. The chronicles call it strategy, they call it providence, but the truth was messier, more intimate, and soaked in private shame. So remember this: when bards sing of Crécy's glory, It is not triumph they echo, but the moans behind curtains, the groans beneath steel, and the lies dressed in velvet, murmured by candlelight. For every arrow loosed, a secret was buried, and though the field lies silent now, the wind still carries their names, those who killed or bedded to win, and all the others who never stood a chance. Even as time dragged toward forgetfulness, one final echo of Crécy screamed its defiance from parchment and poison. In 1361, 15 years after the last French banner fell, a dying knight named Bertrand de Saligny confessed beneath a tattered canopy set deep in the Pyrenees foothills. Fevered and coughing blood, he handed a soiled manuscript to a passing friar, a ledger of debts wrapped inside a lover's diary. Among its tangled pages, names from Crécy reappeared, but rewritten as donors, saboteurs, and blackmail targets. Bertrand named 20 knights who financed betrayals to eliminate rivals for courtly lovers. He revealed that before the battle, a priest disguised as a wine merchant slipped into the French camp, delivering communion laced with deadly belladonna. 3 men died convulsing, conveniently opening promotions for others with whispered entanglements. The friar, horrified, tried to take the pages north to Paris but disappeared en route, last seen beneath the crumbling walls of Montségur. Over the years, fragments of Bertrand's truth resurfaced, scribbled in margins, etched on goblets, murmured in bedchambers lit by scandal's flame. Crécy never ended. It morphed, a battlefield made from desire, perjury, and blood, where honor was a mask and truth wore a courtesan's perfume. And though no chronicle dares to print it outright, the war was less a clash of kingdoms than a lover's quarrel turned lethal. In the end, knights did not fall in glorious combat. They drowned in secrets no blade could pierce, no armor could shield. And France bled not from arrow wounds, but from the slow, delicious rot of everything her nobility tried to keep hidden. The truth of Crécy was never truly buried, it was scattered, like bone splinters in churned earth. A century later, in 1447, during the construction of a chapel on the former battlefield, masons unearthed a rusted helm fused to a jawbone still clenched around a strip of silk. Inscribed upon it in faded thread, "Pour l'amour trahi," for love betrayed. The artifact was quietly removed, never catalogued, its symbolism too dangerous, too lurid. Buried again, but this time beneath stone, prayer, and denial. Yet even then, rumors escaped. Monks spoke of curses whispered into chalices, of noble brides weeping blood on wedding nights. They said Crécy had not been a battle, but a reckoning, a generation consumed by lust and vengeance, where betrayal outlived valor, and arrows merely punctuated tragedies written long before steel ever sang. The wind still rises there, shrieking across the ridge like a grieving lover, and when it does, the grass seems to bend not from breeze but from the weight of names never spoken aloud, secrets never absolved, and ghosts who do not rest, because in the end they were never forgiven. So let Crécy be remembered, not by the banners that fell, but by the lips that lied, the pens that deceived, and the hearts that hunted each other beneath heraldic pretense. Let it be whispered in monasteries and taverns alike that no knight ever truly died for his king but for the lover who lied, for the rival who plotted, for the throne lined with velvet and soaked in limbs. The chronicles gave us pages, the battlefield gave us graves, but behind both were chambers, dripping secrets like candle wax, where war was neither noble nor divine. It was seduction sharpened into steel. And though statues crack and scrolls fade, Crécy's truth remains etched into soil, into gossip, into memory, not as a tale of English victory or French defeat, but as an ode to the venom of desire when mixed with pride. For in that valley of betrayal, arrows rained, yes, but pleasure damned them all, and the ghosts still curse in lovers' tongues. And thus ends the storm of Crécy, not with a cry of triumph, but a whisper drowned in crimson mud. The English chroniclers etched victory in gold, but never inked the names of the dead who betrayed, who bled, who loved in vain. The French scribes blamed fate, but silence was their true ally, hiding the liaisons that orchestrated failure. Beneath every arrow that pierced plate was a pact sealed in sweat and deceit. Behind every banner that fell was a bed unmade by loyalty. The knights came for glory, but left only rot. The lovers came for power, but left only ruin. And the battlefield lies still, pressed flat by the weight of sins denied. No memorial stands for the courtesans who knew too much, the squires ruined by kisses, or the priests who heard one confession too many. But listen when dusk falls over Crécy, and mist snakes like veils across the field, you might still catch it, the faint moan of betrayal too deep for time to silence, the ghost of a kiss that killed, and the rustle of parchment where truth remains too dangerous to be spoken. Not all wounds bleed, some merely echo, forever. Honor did not die swiftly at Crécy. It bled out slow, poisoned by desire, and drowned in secrets no crossbearer could absolve. And as the sun sets behind that ridge where thunder once fell like judgment, the wind carries not hymns, but sighs. The squires who vanished, the poisoners who prayed, the mistresses who mapped empires with lips and lies, all vanished, yet never truly gone. Their truths live on in the shadows between history's proud declarations, in the spaces where ink hesitates. Look not to the monuments for understanding, for they wear masks forged by victors. Look instead beneath the stones, where broken blades cradle wilted roses, and parchment weeps in silence. Crécy was no triumph. It was a confession the world still refuses to read. And so it ends not with glory, but with a ghost story told by the soil itself, of ambition devoured by lust, of crowns shattered by kisses, and of arrows loosed, not by hands, but by hearts already lost. Here, in this field of drowned songs and scorched silk, the final truth lies buried, and all who dare to seek it must dig with trembling fingers and tongues unready for what they'll unearth. So let no bard sing of Crécy without tasting bitterness on the tongue. Let no scribe scratch tales of chivalry without ink turning to blood. For what was lost there can't be butchered into mere victory or defeat. It was an unraveling, a slow seduction of slaughter, where lies conquered nations and longing outmaneuvered lances. Behind every trumpet was a tryst. Beneath every command, a confession. They called it a holy cause, a king's right, an empire's ambition, but the earth remembers otherwise. It remembers the sighs behind silk screens, the coughs of poisoned love letters read too late, and the cries of boys made martyrs not for glory, but for gossip. And now, centuries later, when wind whips through Crécy's hollows, it does not sing, it whispers with the voice of a dead knight, dreaming of the wrong woman's touch. The truth was never lost. It was buried alive. And so the earth closed over it, cloaked in loam and silence, as if mercy could muffle memory. But Crécy's silence was always treacherous, a hush that hummed with all it could not say. For each stone still sunken in the field is a tombstone missed, each gust of wind a whisper from the mouths of those history chose to forget. The knights, they became legends crafted in court halls far from truth. The lovers? Ghosts in linens turned to rot. The betrayers? Shadows that walked out of the chronicles but never out of consequence. Beneath that rain-soaked soil, between rusted blades and rotted silk, lies a truth too human for heraldry, too damning for song. For Crécy was not lost in battle, it was surrendered in bed. And no banner, no hymn, no knighthood will ever wash clean what was written there in flesh, fire, and betrayal. This ends where it always would, in the dark, where arrows sleep and names still scream, unheard but unforgotten. Crécy's final wound was not dealt on the field, but in a letter sealed in wax, never delivered. Written by a knight too ashamed to sign his name, it was addressed to a woman called only Belle Morte, a courtesan rumored to have had lovers on both sides of the ridge. The contents: a confession stitched with longing, of falsified reports, of positions sold for kisses, of brothers left to die so rivals might rise. That letter was found years later, wedged behind a stone in Rouen Cathedral, its ink blurred by moisture, its truth intact. It ended with a single line, scrawled in trembling Latin: "We died for nothing but desire, and it devoured us whole. So let Crécy rest, not as a war remembered for valor, but as a fever dream of lust dressed in steel, where the only victory was silence." The names are forgotten, the betrayals endure. So ends the tale. The scribes refused to pen the massacre, where knights rode toward glory but galloped into scandal. Crécy was no shining clash of valor. It was a dirge played in whispered names, a battlefield soaked not only in blood, but in the brine of wept secrets. No triumph, no redemption, only silk torn with teeth, parchment burned before its truths echoed, and lips that damned kingdoms with kisses laced in lies. The war drums are silent now, but if you listen, not with ears but with guilt, you'll hear it even now in the hush between winds, in the creak of armor buried deep. A battlefield never forgets, especially one built on betrayal.